Hello, everyone. I am here to talk about The Way to Rainy Mountain by N. Scott Momaday. I do come to you with Scar, um, but it's just here as a comfort pillow. So this book was published in 1976. It is N. Scott Momaday's second book. His first book was the novel House Made of Dawn, and that was the first book by a Native American to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. And as far as I can tell, based on a quick internet search, is still the only book by a Native American to win the Pulitzer for fiction, which is kind of sad. um, but this book is not a novel. It is sort of so. And Scott Momaday is from the Kiowa Nation, who lived around Oklahoma. They were a Southern Plains tribe, so mainly around Oklahoma, and they were close with the Comanche who lived in Texas. And Rainy Mountain, if you're curious, is sort of not really much of a mountain. It's more like a hill. But I looked it up. It's a big hill near the where currently the Kiowa reservation is, which is kind of important in their culture. So this is a book that is kind of a combination between history, um, anthology of myths of the Kiowa, and anecdotes from Momaday's life and the lives of people that he knows or his family. Um, so I will give you a bit of a rundown, just a quick rundown of what kind of the structure of this book is. So it's done in these two-page sort of sections. So over here you will have the narrative of some kind of Kiowa myth. And some of the for a while these myths are kind of narratively connected, and then later on they start to just kind of go off and talk about other things. These are just different legends, myths of the Kiowa. Some of them with varying themes and varying settings and things. But over here we have sort of history, or what Momaday calls the voice of historical commentary. Sort of, it'll give some discussion of some aspect of Kiowa society, or some historical event. It turns out we don't know much about Kiowa history because there's not much of a historical record. So we don't actually know much for sure about their history aside from when they were being, subjugated by the United States. And at times this will do some kind of a commentary on the myth itself, but not always. So it varies. But and then down here in this last part, which you can see is in italics. This is in italics too, but anyway. This will be sort of the memoir part. This will be some kind of anecdote from Momaday's life. It seems to be usually focusing on some kind of image, or on some kind of image. And when I first started reading, I was like, I was intrigued and like wondering, okay, what's the relationship between these three voices? That's what Momaday calls them, three voices. And so I sort of started to think, I'm not certain of this, but I sort of started to think, okay, so we have this myth. Some of these myths are a bit weird, like twin boys being raised by a spider. And then we have this historical commentary, and I started to notice that the historical commentary often included some element of the myth, something from the myth that played some part in Kiowa culture, history, their, whatever. And then the anecdote, which as I said, focuses on some kind of image, often also in some indirect way seemed to relate again to some aspect of the myth. That didn't seem to hold perfectly, and sometimes it's a bit more ambiguous what the connection really is. But that is sort of was my tentative conclusion. And I do have a place that's a strong example. But so before I go into the example, well, anyway, no, I'll go into the example. So this is a section where it talks about basically how women were treated in the Kiowa, and it turns out they were treated pretty poorly. In the myth, it's about a woman who abandons her husband. Her husband is like blind, and she sort of just she well, anyway, it's complicated, but anyway, she ends up just leaving him. I won't go into the details because this isn't a book summary, but and then she's just basically, when the tribe finds out, when the husband returns to the tribe, manages to find his way back to the tribe because he's blind, they find out what she did, and then she's just kicked out. And then in the historical commentary, Momaday goes into how women were just kind of treated like property, basically, for men, and men would just fight over them like they'd fight over food, and how they really didn't have any kind of authority at all in the tribe or anything. He says that the only group of people who they were higher status than was slaves. So yeah, and then the memoir part is about a the grandmother of Momaday's grandfather, I believe, named Kawau Ointi. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but in that anecdote, she talked about how she refused to be a good Kiowa woman. So yeah, my thought was that, this is just to show the importance of these myths to the Kiowa as a people, and then show them as how they can be important to an individual. And that left me thinking, okay, so this is sort of a psychological portrait of what it's like to be a Kiowa, I think, sort of, from their own perspective, that is. And it was really interesting. And some of the myths are just cool. I mean, like the origin of where the Kiowa came from is that they crawled out of a log in the mountains of Montana. That they crawled out of a log, and but what happened was that a pregnant woman blocked the entrance of the log, and so not everyone was able to get out of the log. And that is their sort of mythical explanation for why the Kiowa was always such a small tribe. So just stories like that I've always found interesting, how different cultures explain the world with these myths. And there are also these illustrations by Momaday's Al Momaday, who is actually N. Scott Momaday's father, like this one, and they're beautiful, obviously. Yeah, there's another. So yeah, and I think this idea of looking at this is a case study in a Native American nation. But that idea of looking at Native Americans as Native Americans saw themselves, to me, is so important, because I talked about this a bit in, well, no, I didn't talk about this, but we in American schools are often given this very stereotypical, essentialized view of Native Americans as having had these sort of pristine, sort of almost communist utopian societies before became, where they respected nature, no one had any private property, they always used every part of the buffalo, etc. And that's just not human nature. No one could possibly live up to that standard. So it even though it's flattering and maybe well intentioned, it's not really helpful, because what comes with that idea of Native Americans as these perfect humans is that if they don't meet that standard, then all of a sudden we have free reign to view them as these awful savages. But this really gives a portrait of the Kiowa as, it's a celebration of the Kiowa culture and the Kiowa history, but doesn't present them as perfect people. He doesn't tell you all about how you want to live among the Kiowa. Like I was saying about the status of women, he's not afraid to critique the Kiowa, obviously, their way of life. And other, war for the Kiowa was a religious aspect. They were very warlike people, like the Comanche. So it's just offering a more human portrait of the Kiowa that we don't often get in American schools. And in that way, it reminded me a bit of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. So in that book, he gives sort of a similar portrait of the Igbo people in Nigeria, And it laments the conquest of the British of the Igbo peoples, but at the same time isn't afraid to critique the way that the Igbo society was set up before the British came. Um, so yeah, I think that these sorts of things that look at oppressed peoples in complex ways are so important, especially when they're written by the people from those cultures. Um, yeah. So this, I think, is a very important read. Um, I think I wish everyone would read it. I maybe wish it were longer and a bit more substantial, but I need to find. I keep reading these tiny little books or memoirs by Native Americans and keep coming on here and saying, well, this is a good primer on Native American history or the condition of Native Americans. And I really need to read something more substantial, but I also need to find something more substantial. But again, a good just case study in Native Americans as they saw themselves. I'm becoming a broken record, and I think I've exhausted what I'm going to say. So anyway, I do highly recommend this book. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, guys.